Do you know how to write a good narrative essay? A ghost story? Hey guys, welcome back to English Made Possible with me, Teacher M. Today, I'm going to share with you some tips on how to write a good narrative essay, your favorite selection when it comes to continuous writing. I am focusing on the format for SPM and PT3 examinations. A narrative writing is a piece of writing that tells a story. It tests your ability to express an experience in a creative and compelling way to grab your reader's attention. In narrative writing, you may be assigned a specific topic. For example, the scariest moment in my life, or my worst nightmare. A good narrative essay consists of these 5 elements: plot, setting, characters, conflict, and resolution. Let us begin with the first element of narrative writing. Plot is the sequence of events, or we call it a storyline. Can be based on your own experience or your imagined tale. For example, if you are writing about your worst nightmare, you could imagine a storyline based on the horror movies that you have watched before and transform it into your own kind of story. Setting is the location of the events in time, place, and weather. For example, the setting of my worst nightmare could be in an isolated cabin, in an abandoned house, in a run-down hospital, or even in a dormitory. May also lead to the feeling of loneliness as students are far away from homes. This creates a window of opportunity for a typical horror narrative to take over. Or the setting can even take place in your own house. You're supposed to feel safe in your own house, but in this narration, you are terrified. The setting should involve the weather and the atmosphere. For example,
I knew I was in a dark journey home. Thunder roared and lightning flashed across the sky. The howling of wind frightened me all over. It was a cold, gray evening with dull sky threatening rain.
in your sentence, you may describe the setting this way.
As Annie Lucas was about to fall asleep, she was awakened by the howling wind and a desperate knocking at her dormitory door.
This introductory tells that Annie could be a student, as she was in a dorm when she heard the sound of the howling wind and the desperate knockings of the door in the middle of the night reveals that something scary and creepy could take place. Next, the characters. The characters are the people involved in the story. The main character is the person who is impacted by the plot. For example, if you're telling a story about a nightmare, the person who is being attacked or disturbed by a ghost, a vampire, or a serial killer, for example, would be the main character of the story. The person could be you yourself as the first person point of view, or you may use the third person point of view, means you are narrating a story that happened to other people. In this case, you may name the character Annie Lucas, for example. We may also have minor characters. Could be a friend to Annie Lucas, and you may name the character Amanda Smith, for instance. The minor character are the supporting characters to help you in your storyline. The description of the character is important to hook the examiners to enjoy your narration. For example,
Annie Lucas, a petite yet fearless 16-year-old girl of ancient castle school, was reading a horror novel when she suddenly heard the sound of desperate knocking at her dormitory door. Her dormitory mate, Amanda Smith, in a ponytail, dressed in her pajamas, ran out of her room upon hearing the loud scream.
A comprehensive description of the characters will attract your reader's attention to know more about the characters. Now, let's move on to the beginning of your story. The beginning of your narration sets the tone for everything that will happen next. An opener is like an appetizer offering a tasty morsel of what's to come. When you start to write a story, you might not know where it is heading. That's okay. Play with the possibilities. Try these few strategies. You may begin your essay by asking questions, or you can use a dialogue.
Why does the whispering voice always follow me around? Do I have a follow me sign on my back? Annie whispered to herself.
For the next strategy, you may begin by describing the weather. For example,
the lightning flashed across the sky, followed by the roar of thunder. The wind was sighing and thrashing when Annie heard a voice calling her name.
And the next one, you may begin by describing the setting. For example,
there was a small room near her dormitory that Annie would enter from time to time. She would sit on a big old couch in the room, dangling her feet off the edge, reading her favorite horror novels.
For the next one, you may begin with the background information.
Annie Lucas is my friend. She is fearless and brave enough to stay awake at wee hours reading horror novels while her other friends are deep asleep.
And the next strategy, you can have the main character to introduce herself or himself.
I am Annie Lucas. I just turned 16 and I want to share with you about the most terrifying experience of my life.
Those are some strategies that you can use to start your narrative essays. The next element that you have to consider in your narrative writing is the conflict. Conflict is the problem that is being resolved, a moment of tension which involves challenges and resolution. For example, how Annie Lucas struggles to get rid of the disturbance from the vampire. For example,
Annie heard a creaking sound. The light suddenly turned off. She pulled up her blanket, trying to get to sleep. It rained like bullet drops on the roof. She suddenly saw a black shadowy figure with no head or limbs. She took a deep breath and promised to be good to God after this. Her only source of sanity was gone when she realized the beds next to her were empty. The dormitory door was being knocked on endlessly. She was trying to ignore it. She thought that could be her dorm mates. She went to open the door, hoping her friends would come back. She was speechless when there was nobody at the door. She shakily closed and locked the door. She ran to her bed and sensed a freezing cold hand touching her back. She saw bloodshot eyes that belonged to a creepy doll smiling back at her. She screamed, stumbled and hit the floor with a loud thump. She fainted after that.
The next element is resolution. Resolution is the part of the story where the conflict is resolved and is typically where the story ends. For example,
the next thing she remembered, her warden woke her up at the corridor and she was screaming out loud. Her friend Amanda, in a ponytail and dressed in her pajamas, jumped out of her bed when she heard the scream. Annie then told them about what she dreamt.
And finally, please conclude the story with a relevant moral value.
Despite the terrible nightmare, Annie Lucas had learned a lesson to always listen to her mother's advice, to avoid reading horror novels at wee hours, especially during examination weeks. Nightmares are usually the result of stress and anxiety, so avoid reading scary stories before bed. Otherwise, you will have frequent nightmares and they may affect your daily routine.
For the points that I have shared, you may adapt and adopt the ideas of your narration for several different topics. For example, the worst nightmare, the day I can never forget, the most terrible experience in my life. Write a story beginning with, I could not sleep throughout that night. Or write a story ending with, she decided to always listen to her parents' advice. You have to be creative in dealing with the topic of your essay. I know you can do it, and may the success be with you. All the best! I'll be sharing with you more ideas towards writing good essays, so keep on watching English Made Possible with Teacher M.